A single point of light, flickering beneath a fissure in the Greenland ice sheet, appeared on an unmarked satellite. Past the night of March 14, 2024, engineers at the European Space Agency watched in silence as the glow pulsed with an unnatural rhythm too precise to be geothermal, too steady to be human-made. ESA, internal memo. Moments later, the feed cut, replaced by static and a warning. Data corrupted. In that instant, a hidden facility codenamed Project Aurora merged from decades of whispered rumors into undeniable reality. They told us the Arctic was only melting ice and rising seas, but the satellite feed that night proved the Thaw had uncovered something that should have stayed buried forever. Welcome to MysteryCon. Before we dive deeper, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to stay tuned. I remember the hum of the control room more vividly than any face. The consoles flickered in sterile rows, washed in that pale bluish glow that made everyone look half dead. My name is Anna Richter, Senior Data Analyst at ESA's Earth Observation Division. At least, that was my title before the March anomaly erased the line between climate monitoring and something I still don't fully believe. It started the way these things always do, routine sweeps of polar thermal signatures, the same dance of data and confirmation. At 3:17 Coordinated Universal Time, the main feed from Sentinel-5B went black for exactly 8 seconds. That alone was enough to raise a flag. But when the signal returned, it brought something I'd never seen. A structured lattice of light threading under 2 kilometers of Petermann Glacier, flickering with an order that no natural process could produce. I tried to dismiss it at first artifact, instrument error, maybe a solar reflection. But the signature was clean, geometrically precise, and it was hot. Not geothermal hot, not the diffuse gradients of permafrost melt, but a sudden, pulsing thermal surge, as if the glacier itself were alive, exhaling some hidden fire. I called Jian Wang at the Danish Meteorological Institute. I'd never met him in person, only heard the steady calm of his voice on coordination calls. That night, his voice was anything but calm. He was already overlaying the thermal band data against the old 1799 impact site coordinate SATI 1.1 north, 62.3 west, the so-called GRL D1799 marker. I remember how he whispered the code under his breath, like he was trying to convince himself. "It wasn't real, Anna," he said. "This isn't an artifact, it's a signal." I leaned in, studying the frames again. A square field of heat shimmering in a pattern, repeating every 11 seconds. I don't know why it felt like a heartbeat. Just a rhythm too deliberate to ignore. By 4 o'clock UTC, the escalation protocol was triggered. A chain of encrypted notifications swept across secure NATO channels. Washington, Brussels, Copenhagen, all the usual desks that pretend climate monitoring is only about forecasts and seasonal trends, but the political urgency wasn't about melting ice. It was about Project Aurora, and whether the Thaw had finally breached the vault. I had only heard rumors something about a meteorite strike in 1799 and anomalous alloys buried beneath Greenland's ice cap. If I'm honest, I thought it was the kind of institutional myth that flourishes in secret programs, half distraction, half folklore. But the moment the security team locked down our feeds and switched to classified frequency, I knew those stories had teeth. The official line that morning was terse operational anomaly. Instrument calibration in progress. I watched my supervisor deliver the phrase to the press liaison with a practiced emptiness in her eyes. She knew, as I did, that no recalibration could explain a lattice of thermal signatures that obeyed no known natural law. Somewhere in that frozen expanse, a boundary had been crossed. I saw it in the satellite timestamps and the jittering temperature deltas. But more than anything, I felt it a rising certainty that the glacier wasn't just melting. It was bleeding secrets into the world. At 6:23 UTC, the final confirmation arrived: a coded message from a Pentagon liaison in Brussels. 3 words: phase beta imminent. I still don't know what phase beta meant, not in any operational sense. But as I sat alone in that humming room, the dull ache behind my eyes became something sharper, a knowledge I couldn't shake. Whatever was stirring under Petermann Glacier had waited centuries to be found, and the thaw had just given it permission to wake. I signed the event log with a hand that wouldn't stop trembling. Jian called once more before dawn, his voice brittle from exhaustion. "Anna," he said quietly, "do you think we did this? The monitoring, the drilling, the warming, do you think we set it free?" I didn't answer, because the truth was already starting to take shape in my mind. Climate change was never just an environmental crisis. It was the catalyst, the accomplice. And now, with each melting layer, it was peeling back a threshold we were never meant to cross. At 7:04 UTC, the anomaly vanished. The lattice of heat folded in on itself, like a curtain closing. No residual warmth, no seismic spike, just a perfect return to baseline. But the feed didn't look the same to me. I kept staring at the raw data for hours, convinced some hidden residue lingered in the pixels, some mark of intention. That morning, as the rest of the team shuffled in with stale coffee and tired eyes, I knew the world would never see this the way I did. To them, it was an unexplained fluctuation, a footnote in the quarterly report. To me, it was the first undeniable proof that the ice had always been a mask, and the face beneath it had just opened its eyes. I left the control room just after 8, stepping into the brittle northern daylight. The wind smelled of salt and old machinery. In that moment, I made a silent promise to myself. If the thaw had begun to expose what lay buried, I would follow the evidence, wherever it led, even if it meant standing alone, even if it meant becoming something I didn't yet understand. Because when you witness the awakening of something ancient, you can't pretend you didn't see it. You can't go back to sleep, and deep down, I think a part of me knew I was already too late. I never imagined a climate research station could feel like a war zone. But by the time I arrived in Nuuk, Greenland, everything about Project Aurora had the weight of a classified operation. The briefing packet they handed me was thin only to printed pages, each line redacted until only the title remained: Aurora, Subglacial Hydrology Observatory. Even then, I could feel the lie humming between the words. Jen had warned me before I left Darmstadt. If you start asking about FR1799, you'll never come back the same, he'd said over a scrambled line. I thought he was being dramatic. But when my plane touched down on that ice-blown runway, I understood. Inside the main facility, the hallways were narrow and hot with recycled air. Every door had a keycard reader and a camera above it. I counted them without thinking, noting how each lens followed me as I walked. My assigned desk was in a windowless annex labeled Public Affairs. The irony wasn't lost on me. The other analysts didn't introduce themselves. Most kept their heads down, tapping quietly at encrypted terminals. No one asked what I was doing there. Maybe they already knew. I spent the first 3 days reviewing Climate data that looked harmless, temperature charts, melt rate projections, logistical logs. But in the metadata, I found a hidden layer of tags. They referenced FR 1799 characterization trials, phase beta neural integration, and something I'd never heard of, delta array partial activation. Late that third night, I couldn't stop thinking. About those words, I should have let it go. But curiosity has a gravity all its own. I stayed in the lab long after the others had left. The hum of the ventilation system was the only sound. I pulled up a secondary file server, searching for any cross-dash references. The first hit was a procurement manifestos of expenses hidden under innocuous labels. Replacement drill heads, chemical storage fees, cryo-shipping costs. But when I cross-checked the account numbers, they didn't lead to any research budget I recognized. Instead, they traced back to a private contractor, Cryotech Solutions. I'd heard that name once, in a briefing about covert funding channels that blurred the line between science and weapons research. Seeing it in the ledger made my skin crawl. At 2:37 a.m. I shut down the terminal and slipped the printed manifest into my pocket. My heart thumped as I walked back to my quarters. It felt like carrying contraband through a checkpoint. That same night, I woke to a knock on my door. It was a soft, almost polite tapping that somehow made it worse. I opened it to find a woman in a parka, her hood pulled low. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice level. I tried to muster some bravado. "I have clearance. Level 6. She studied me for a moment. "Clearance doesn't mean understanding. Come with me." I should have slammed the door, but something in her tone resigned made me pause. I followed her down the hall, past the empty control stations, to a supply room with a single lamp over the table. She unzipped her coat, revealing a badge with a NATO insignia. "My name is Dr. Ingar Blix. I'm supposed to pretend this is about glacier dynamics, but you already know that isn't true." I didn't speak. I was afraid my voice would betray how shaken I felt. She slid a plastic folder across the table. Inside were images I wasn't prepared to see, grainy photographs of a metallic shard embedded in ice. Each picture labeled FR 1799 section, "See this is what they're digging out," she said quietly. "And this is why the Chinese satellites are watching our transmissions." I flipped through the images. In every frame, the fragments seemed to pulse with a dull reflection that made my eyes ache. "You've seen it," I whispered. "No," she said, "but I've seen what it does." The first drill tests caused equipment failures. Then personnel started disappearing. I wanted to ask who she'd lost, but she pressed on. "There's more." She pulled out a smaller photo, an aerial shot of a Russian icebreaker, its deck crowded with cranes and sealed containers. Northern Shield exercise was stenciled on the hull. "They're moving in," she said. "Everyone wants a piece of the alloy. They don't understand it could kill us all." I looked up, and for the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. Not just professional concern, but something personal. "What do you want from me?" I asked. "Help me leak this," she said. "You have the connections. European networks, civilian analysts. Someone needs to know what's buried here." I didn't answer. My throat was tight. Every instinct told me I was crossing a line I could never uncross. When she left, she didn't say goodbye. She only pulled up her hood and vanished down the corridor. I sat in that empty room, the images spread before me, my hands shaking by dawn. I'd memorized every label, every coordinate. I told myself I wasn't committed. I was just gathering information. But that was a lie. The next morning, a new directive was waiting on my terminal. All personnel must submit devices for security audits. I felt cold as I handed over my phone and laptop. When the technician took them, he didn't look at me. All day, I waited for someone to come question me, but no one did. That night, I walked to the perimeter fence. The floodlights bleached the snow in blinding white. In the distance, the drilling tower loomed over the camp, its silhouette unbroken against the dark sky. I thought about the chain of events that had brought me here. A thermal anomaly, a satellite glitch, a single fragment of metal that didn't belong on this planet. I thought about my old life coffee in Darmstadt, the quiet certainty of routine, and I realized I couldn't go back. Even if I left Greenland tomorrow, I'd never be the same. A sharp crack split the air behind meal-like ice fracturing under pressure. I turned fast, heart hammering. Nothing moved, but I felt watched, as though the glacier itself was studying me. I went back to my quarters and locked the door. All night, I kept replaying Inga's words. They don't understand, it could kill us all. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. The following evening, I received a single encrypted message on a burner phone I'd hidden in my luggage. No sender, no introduction, just a text. If you care about survival, don't trust cryotech. They fund Aurora, but their contract is not just research. They want integration. If you leak, they will erase you. I stared at the message, feeling the last certainty in me collapse. It wasn't just about the metal anymore, or the geopolitical game. It was about something deeper, some intention that no one had explained. I deleted the message, but I knew it didn't matter. Someone already knew I was looking too closely. When I finally lay down, the hum of the generators vibrated through the floor like a distant heartbeat, and in that restless half-sleep, I dreamed of a glacier cracking open and something vast unfolding beneath the ice. A shape that waited, patient and indifferent, for the world above to warm enough to let it breathe again. In the weeks that followed my meeting with Inga, I tried to act normal. I kept to my station, logged the daily reports, nodded politely to the researchers who drifted past my desk without ever meeting my eyes. But beneath the calm surface, something was unraveling. I hadn't told anyone about the photos she showed me, not even Jian, though I typed out a dozen messages to him before deleting them. Every day I told myself I could still walk away, but I didn't believe it anymore. It was late November when the first real fracture appeared in the containment. I was in the annex lab, running a cross-reference between logistics shipments and the restricted project budgets. It was a pointless exercise, or so I thought, a way to keep my hands busy while my mind spun in circles. At 2:11 in the morning, a notification blinked on my secondary monitor. File transfer completed. I frowned. I hadn't initiated any transfer. When I opened the log, I saw a single entry, a hashed archive labeled GRLD 1799. The user listed was Alvarez.m. I didn't know the name. I almost flagged it to security, but something stopped me. Instead, I pulled the file into a sandbox environment and began a checksum analysis. It wasn't small, over 800 megabytes compressed. I felt my pulse thudding as I watched the progress bar creep across the screen. The file was encrypted with a simple passphrase, too simple, really. Almost as if whoever had uploaded it wanted it to be cracked. I typed the only word that made sense. Peterman. The archive opened without protest inside. There were folders named with dates and long numeric codes. Some held what looked like technical schematics, cross-sections of a cylindrical structure buried under kilometers of ice. Others contained raw, seismic data annotated in a Style 1. Recognized immediately. Dr. Kovalev. I'd read one of her papers on polar tremors, published years ago, but these files were different. They showed rhythmic seismic pulses at precisely regular intervals. Not earthquakes, not glacial shifts, something more deliberate. I scrolled through the folders, numb, until I found one labeled Binance. The directory contained transaction records, long alphanumeric strings paired with crypto wallet IDs. I knew just enough about blockchain to understand the significance. Someone had been moving funds through decentralized exchanges, masking transfers from one private contractor to another, and there, in the last line, a payment reference. Cryotech Solutions, operations funding, node retrieval. I sat back in my chair. My skin felt hot, then cold. It all connected. Cryotech, the Russian icebreaker, the alloy no one could explain. The drilling was never about climate models. It was about unearthing something. I didn't know how long I sat there, reading the same lines over and over. But eventually, I copied the folder to an encrypted drive and wiped the logs. I should have destroyed the files. Instead, I slipped the drive into the lining of my jacket and walked outside. The air was sharp, almost metallic. The moon hung low over the compound. For a moment, everything felt hollow like the snowfield. The perimeter lights, even my own breathing, were just a thin veneer over something vast and waiting. The next day, the leak hit the darknet. I was in the cafeteria when the first alerts started to roll in chat threads, async forums, private Discord servers. People were decrypting the file in real time, posting screenshots of schematics, seismic charts, funding ledgers. Someone tagged me in a private channel I'd used back in Darmstadt. The message was just a link to a blog post, deeppolar.net, GRLD 1799 unmasked. I followed the link on my phone. Heart hammering. The post was meticulous time-stamped images of every document, cross-referenced with public records. The author claimed they had verified the data with 2 independent sources. One detail stopped me cold. A seismic array registered a drilling event at a depth of 3,050 meters, followed by a sudden suppression of all monitoring equipment. No explanation provided. I knew that event log. I had seen it in passing weeks earlier, but I'd never connected it to this. My hands were trembling so badly, I nearly dropped the phone. Across the table, one of the security liaisons glanced up. I forced myself to look away, to take a slow breath. By evening, the story had migrated to bigger platforms, science blogs, alternative media outlets, encrypted forums. Most called it a hoax, but some took it seriously. One post in particular rattled me. A user named Snowman claimed they had corroborated the seismic anomalies with private sensor logs, and that the drilling had breached an engineered structure. It's not a meteorite fragment, Snowman wrote. It's an interface. I closed the page, feeling something tighten in my chest. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay on the narrow bunk, watching the shadows creep across the ceiling, thinking of the word interface. The next morning, they announced a full audit of all network activity. Every analyst was required to submit to an interview. I told myself I could bluff my way through it. I had always been good at compartmentalizing. But when the door closed behind me and the lead investigator fixed me with a blank stare, I felt the first real pang of regret. He didn't ask if I was involved in the leak. He didn't need to. Instead, he slid a single sheet of paper across the table. On it was a transcript of an internal chat log, my own words, lifted from a supposedly secure channel weeks ago. If this ever gets out, it'll make Snowden look like an amateur. I met his gaze, trying to keep my voice level. I was speculating. Everyone speculates. He didn't respond, just flipped the page to show the next line. Someone needs to blow the lid off this before it's too late. In that moment, I realized how little control I had left. They released me after 2 hours, but the message was clear. My movements were no longer my own. That evening, I found an envelope under my door. No name, no seal. Inside was a folded sheet of paper with a single sentence typed in block letters. If you won't tell the truth, we will. And below it, a URL for an encrypted paste bin. I shouldn't have followed the link, but I did. It led to a dump of additional files, drill logs, incident reports, images of core samples, each one more unsettling than the last dot. One stood outer, blurry photo of what looked like a smooth metallic surface etched with geometric symbols. Underneath, someone had scrawled in pen, "It's awake." I closed the browser, my pulse racing. For the first time since arriving in Greenland, I felt sure I wasn't alone in this. Somewhere, someone was trying to finish what the leak had started, but I didn't know if they were an ally or something else entirely. I spent the next days in a fog, going through the motions of work, waiting for the next escalation. It came sooner than I expected. One evening, as I returned from the data center, I noticed the lock on my quarters had been forced. Inside, the place was untouched except for the bunk, where my encrypted drive lay in plain view on the pillow. A message was taped to it. "You're already in this. Decide where you stand." I sat down, feeling the last illusion of safety slip away. I knew then there would be no easy way out. No compromise that would let me walk away clean. Outside, the wind howled across the compound, rattling the steel walls like a warning. Some part of me still hoped I was overreacting, that this was all an elaborate bluff. But deep down, I knew better. The glacier was no longer the only thing fracturing. Something inside me had cracked too, and whatever waited beneath the ice, it was already changing everything I believed about this world. When the first press releases came out, they were almost soothing in their confidence. A polished woman in a slate-grey suit stood in front of a bland backdrop reading Greenland Climate, Observatory Delta. She smiled as she spoke about an unprecedented opportunity to study subglacial hydrology and transparent, peer-reviewed science. I sat alone in my quarters, watching her lips move on my laptop screen, and felt a hollow ache in my chest. Every word was a practiced performance. The public believed it. Even Jian sent me a message that morning. "Looks like they're finally opening the data portal. Maybe they'll ease up on restrictions." But when I tried to access the site, it was just an error, page 404, resource not found. I refreshed the link again and again. Same result. That night, I walked to the operations hub, trying to clear my thoughts. Snow drifted across the compound, the wind scraping the metal siding in ragged gusts. In the glow of the security lights, I saw two figures unloading crates from a transport sled. They didn't look up as I passed. I kept thinking about the envelope I'd found days earlier. The message that said, "You're already in this." Part of me wanted to forget, to hand over everything and let the authorities sort it out. But another part was restless, almost hungry for answers. The line between duty and obsession had blurred so quietly I hadn't noticed until it was too late. I told myself I needed proof before making any move, something no official statement could smother 3 days later. I got it. A journalist I'd met years ago, who went by the initials SL, sent me an encrypted email. No greeting, just a subject line. They forgot to redact this. I clicked the attachment. It was a scanned memo stamped DIAIs only. The first lines looked harmless logistics about microwave telemetry arrays. STANDARD. Language about monitoring atmospheric conditions. Then I reached the final paragraph. Additional frequency ranges have been allocated 22 to 30 gigahertz to monitor non-terrestrial sources. Under no circumstances will this data be released to civilian oversight. I read it twice, feeling the skin on the back of my neck tighten. Nan-terrestrial. The word pulsed in my thoughts long after I closed the file at dawn. I walked the perimeter, alone. The cold was relentless, but I needed to feel something real against my skin. That afternoon, I decided to find Inga again. She was the only person here who'd spoken to me without protocol or euphemisms. But when I stopped by her assigned lab, it was dark. The door panel blinked red. Access suspended. I tried to ask a supervisor what had happened. He only shook his head. Dr. Blix has been rotated out, he said. That's all you need to know. I stared at the empty doorway, a sick heaviness pooling in my stomach. Rotated out was their way of saying she'd been removed, maybe transferred, maybe something worse. That night, I slept in short, broken intervals. I kept imagining her face, the way she'd looked when she warned me about the drilling dot. Just after midnight, I jolted awake. My laptop screen was lit with a single notification, a message from Snowman. I hadn't heard from them directly before. I clicked the link. They will never open the portal. The core samples are not stored here. They are moved by convoy every 6 weeks to a facility near Thule. If you want proof, follow the transport manifest attached. I scrolled to the bottom. A file waited, marked Phase Beta Convoy Schedule. I shouldn't have opened it, but my hand moved on its own. The schedule was precise dates, times, GPS coordinates. Each shipment listed as cryotech non-bulk specimen. As I read, an idea formed in my mind. Reckless, maybe suicidal. If I could intercept a shipment, just get one clear image of the cargo, I could force the story into the open. The next day, I made excuses to leave the compound. I claimed I needed to deliver a sealed drive to the airfield dispatch office. No one questioned it. Maybe they thought surveillance alone was enough to keep me in check. The snow had drifted high along the access road, muffling every step. My breath came in ragged bursts. At the dispatch building, I found a single clerk on duty. He didn't look up when I slipped the convoy schedule into my jacket, along with a printed map of the routes north. On my way out, I saw something that made me pause. A set of fresh tire tracks, larger than any supply truck I'd seen. I followed them around the side of the building. 2 matte black transport vehicles were idling in the dark, exhaust curling into the cold. Their side panels bore no markings, just a single decal near the driver's door, a stylized geometric emblem I recognized. Immediately the same pattern etched into the artifact from the leaked images. I backed away before anyone noticed. My heart thudded so hard it hurt. When I returned to my quarters, I locked the door and sat in the dark, forcing myself to breathe slowly. I knew then I couldn't pretend to be an observer any longer. I had crossed a threshold. The following evening, I took my encrypted drive and prepared a data drop to SL. But as I tried to send it, the satellite uplink failed. I waited an hour, tried again. Still offline. I checked the compound's network, dashboard, everything was operational except for external relay connections. Someone had cut us off at 2:14. A knock sounded at my door. Not loud, not urgent, but patient. I didn't answer. The knock came again, and a woman's voice called softly, "Anna, please open the door." It wasn't Inga's voice. I pressed my back to the wall and stayed silent. After a long pause, footsteps retreated down the hall. I waited another hour before I dared to power down the laptop and hide the drive inside the foam lining of my pack. When sleep finally came, it was shallow and full of fractured images, cargo containers, coded messages, the frozen face of the woman from the press briefing, smiling like nothing was wrong. By morning, the official narrative had spread across every major outlet. The climate observatory was sharing data with the world. The subglacial research was transparent and collaborative. I stared at the headlines. Numb, they had perfected the art of the lied, just enough truth to pass as real, just enough polish to soothe the public. But I knew the cracks were widening. Inga was gone. The shipments were moving. The uplink was severed, and somewhere under the ice, something ancient was waiting to be uncovered. I told myself I still had a choice, that I could walk away before this consumed me. But that was another lie, because deep down, I didn't want to walk away. I wanted to see how far the truth would go, even if it swallowed me whole. I used to think there was a point in every operation when the truth would solidify some final confirmation you could hold in your hands. But the deeper I sank into Project Aurora, the more that certainty dissolved. Every fact felt provisional. Every ally could be an informant. It was early December when I finally learned the name. I had been circling for weeks without realizing. Dr. Marcus Heilmann. First saw it on a personnel manifest buried in a maintenance folder. Nothing overt. Just a single line. Lead technical advisor, M. Heilmann, clearance Alpha-5. I read the name again and again, trying to place it. Then it clicked, years ago. When I was still at ESA, Heilmann was a rising star. He'd been credited with designing the most accurate simulation model of Arctic ice flow in history. I'd seen his face in a conference program, narrow features, dark hair, and intensity behind the eyes. You didn't forget. He disappeared in 2022. Some said he'd gone to industry. Others claimed he'd burned out. But the rumors never stopped. Spent the next 3 nights pulling fragments of information from every archive database I could access. Most of the records had been scrubbed, old publications erased, employment histories overwritten. But there were gaps in the erasure, footprints they hadn't fully concealed. One was a transcript of a lecture Hyman gave at Gatting and Beyond. Earthborn alloys. The file had no abstract, only a set of notes scrawled in the margins. Phase beta, metamaterial lattice with neural potentiation properties, adaptive resonance structures responding to electromagnetic fields. I didn't pretend to understand the physics, but the words chilled me. Neural potentiation. They weren't just mining the meteorite fragment. They were studying how it interacted with the human nervous system. I closed the file and leaned back in my chair, my pulse drumming in my ears. The next day, I made up an excuse to enter the operations archive. I told the clerk I was verifying supply manifests for the European Commission. He barely looked up. The archive was a cold, fluorescent-lit space, lined with narrow shelves. It smelled of cardboard and metal. I found the section labeled Special Programs, Restricted, and my hand hovered over the folders. I told myself I would just look for confirmation, nothing more. But I knew that was another lie. At the back of the shelf, I spotted a slim file, stamped with an older ESA crest one that hadn't been used in a decade. I pulled it free and flipped it open. Inside were project charters signed by Heilmann himself. His signature was sharp and deliberate. Objective: integrate FR1 799 materials into experimental neural interfaces. Develop proof of concept prototypes capable of bidirectional signal transmission. I turned the page. My fingers unsteady. Projected application, defense and strategic deterrence. Potential for mass cognitive influence. I swallowed hard. For the first time, I felt a true sense of dread. This wasn't about climate research or even exotic materials. It was about control. When I returned to my quarters, I locked the door and tried to calm my thoughts. But the implications churned like acid in my stomach. That evening, as I sat in the dim glow of the desk lamp, my laptop pinged with an anonymous file drop. No sender, no subject line. Just a single video file. Heilmann _interview _223.mp. 4. I hesitated before opening it. The video began with a timestamp March 4th, 2023, and the low hum of an audio recorder. Heilmann sat in a plain chair, his face older. Then I remembered. A man's voice, unseen, asked him to explain his motivations. Heilmann didn't look at the camera. He spoke in a calm, flat tone. We have an opportunity to redesign the foundations of perception itself, he said. If we don't, someone else will, and they will weaponize it first. He paused. His eyes shifted toward the interviewer. I'm not interested in geopolitics. I'm interested in survival. We can't afford to think small. The video ended abruptly. I sat there in silence, feeling the air thicken around me. Heilmann had vanished from public view, but he hadn't retired. He'd simply stepped into the shadows. The next morning, a memo was pinned to the main notice board. All personnel were to attend a briefing at 0900 in the central hall. I joined the line filing into the cavernous space. The air smelled of stale coffee and diesel. At the front, a tall woman in a black uniform waited. Her eyes swept the room as if memorizing every face. She introduced herself as LTC MDR, Alicia Rowe, the official liaison for security compliance. As of this week, she said, a new directive has been issued by project leadership. All references to phase beta are classified above your clearance. Any attempt to access restricted materials will be treated as a breach of the NATO-EU cooperative framework. Her gaze lingered on me just a fraction longer than the others. When the meeting ended, I slipped away, heart hammering. I knew then they were tightening the perimeter. Someone had tipped them off that leaks were still happening. That night, I paced the length of my room. Part of me still wanted to believe I could stay in the background, that I could watch, record, and maybe leave when it was over. But I couldn't unknow what I had seen. A few hours before dawn, I logged into the private forum where Snowman posted. I hadn't dared contact them directly, but that morning I typed a short message. You were right about phase beta. I have documents. I need a safe channel. I waited in the dark, the seconds dragging past. After 20 minutes, a reply came. Upload nothing here. Use the Dropbox key I've attached. This network is compromised. I copied the key, my hands slick with sweat. Then a second message appeared. Heilmann is not the architect. He's the messenger. The real program is called Archangel. Watch for references in shipping logs. I stared at the words, trying to process them. Archangel. I had never seen that name in any document. But I knew it was the next threshold. Outside, a snow squall had blown in, blotting out the perimeter lights. I closed the laptop, feeling the darkness press against the thin walls. That night, as I drifted into an uneasy sleep, I knew I had crossed another invisible line. I wasn't just a witness anymore. I was part of the story, and there would be no way back by the time December darkened into the long polar night. The compound felt like an island cut loose from the rest of the world. Supplies arrived by convoy, the same trucks I'd seen in the shadows weeks before. Communications were filtered through security officers who never smiled. It was during one of these supply offloads that I first noticed her up-close LTCM. Alicia Rowe. She stood near the main platform as workers unloaded sealed crates marked with Cryotech's cryptic inventory codes. She wasn't wearing the standard Arctic parka. Her black uniform looked almost ceremonial, its collar lined with silver insignia I didn't recognize. People stepped aside when she passed. Even the supervisors lowered their eyes. I told myself she was just another official, another cog in the machine, but deep down, I felt a flicker of unease I couldn't name. 3 days later, I learned why. I was in the records annex, reviewing logs from the last transport. Each shipment had a barcode scanned into the central manifest. Most listed innocuous contents drilling equipment, fuel cells, spare communication arrays, but one line item was different. Specimen, transfer, FR1799, live containment, my breath. Caught. I checked the date and time. It matched the convoy Rowe had overseen. I flipped through the preceding entries, hands trembling. There, buried in the signature column, was her NAMA, Rowe Liaison Authorization. 100 questions formed at once. What was she moving? What did live containment mean? I tried to make a copy of the manifest, but the terminal locked me out before I could finish. The screen flashed a warning I hadn't seen before. Unauthorized access logged. Report generated. I left the annex before anyone arrived. My pulse didn't steady until I was back in my quarters with the door locked. I thought about the files Snowman had sent me, about Archangel, about the phase beta. Each piece was part of a puzzle I no longer felt qualified to solve. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the look in Rao's eyes as she watched the crates being loaded. It wasn't curiosity or pride. It was something harder to define. Maybe she believed in what they were doing. Maybe she believed it was worth any cost. 2 days later, I received an unmarked envelope under my door. Inside was a photograph. Rowe stood on the deck of a research vessel, a dark sea stretching out behind her. She wore the same black uniform. Her hand rested on a crate identical to the ones in the manifest. On the back of the photo, someone had written in block letters, Project Blue Apex, June 15, 2023. Samples in transit. I'd never heard of Blue Apex, but the date matched an incident I'd only seen mentioned once in a redacted diplomatic cable describing biocontainment protocols for non-terrestrial specimens. My first instinct was to burn the photo. Instead, I hid it beneath the lining of my pack with the rest of the evidence. I knew I was running out of time to decide where I stood. The next evening, as the compound settled into its uneasy routine, I slipped into the observation winger. Narrow hallway lined with windows overlooking the main operations floor. Below me, Rowe was conferring with 2 men I didn't recognize. They were both dressed in civilian parkas, but their posture gave them away military, or something close to it. They spoke in hushed tones. At one point, one of them handed Ro a tablet. She studied it, her expression flat. Then she nodded once, and the man tucked it into his coat. I pressed my hand to the cold glass, feeling a hollow certainty tighten inside me. Whatever was happening here had already moved beyond science. It was something strategic, something that would never see daylight if they could help it. When I turned to leave, I nearly collided with a figure stepping out of the shadows. A tall man, older, with silver hair and eyes that didn't blink. He looked at me calmly. "You shouldn't be here," he said. I tried to muster my composure. "I was told this wing was cleared for observation." His gaze didn't waver. "That's not accurate," I swallowed, fighting to keep my voice steady. "Then you'll have to log a report." For a long moment, he studied me. Then he stepped aside. "I suggest you return to your quarters," he said. I walked away without looking back. My heart didn't stop racing until I was behind my locked door for the first time. I began to wonder if I'd underestimated how far they'd go to protect this. Hours later, I received a single text on my burner phone. "You were seen leave tomorrow. If you can." It wasn't signed. I turned off the phone and set it on the floor, staring at it in the dim light. I didn't leave. The next morning, the internal network was restricted to approved personnel only. My login no longer worked. By afternoon, I knew I'd been officially cut off. But that evening, as I sat in the dark, my laptop pinged with an unexpected connection request. "Secure channel, Snowman." I accepted, my breath held tight in my chest. A chat window opened. "Snowman, they know you were in observation. They know you have the photo." "Me, how?" "Snowman, doesn't matter. Listen, Ro isn't the enemy." "Not exactly." I stared at the screen. "Me. Explain." "Snowman. She signed those shipments because she believed containment was safer than denial. She's not here to bury it. She's here to control it." A long pause. "Snowman. She thinks if the Russians or the Chinese get FR-1799 first, it's over." I sat back, absorbing it. It sounded plausible, but it didn't make me feel any better. "Me, how do you know?" "Snowman, because I was in Project Blue Apex. Briefly, Ro authorized the first extractions, but she also filed the only internal objection." Another pause. "Snowman, check the last shipping log. Look for sample designate A1. Before I could respond, the channel terminated. I sat alone in the quiet, feeling the walls close in around me. That night, I made a decision. If there was any hope of understanding what we were really dealing with, I had to confront Ro myself. I waited until the operations floor had thinned out. Then I made my way to the security annex, where she kept her private office. The door was locked. A small red light glowed over the handle. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the panel. Then, without fully deciding, I knocked. For a long time, nothing happened. I was about to turn away when the door clicked open. Ro stood in the threshold. Her expression didn't change. "I wondered when you'd come," she said. I didn't answer. She stepped aside, motioning me in. Inside, the office was spare one desk, a single lamp, a steel cabinet with no labels. Ro closed the door behind us. "You've been following the shipments," she said. It wasn't a question. I took a slow breath. "I want to know what sample A1 is." Her eyes flickered just once, the only break in her composure I'd ever seen. "You don't," she said quietly. We stood there in the pale light, two people who had crossed too many lines to go back. I realized then that whatever answer she gave me would be dangerous, but it was too late to pretend I could turn away. I stood in Rouse' office longer than I should have. We didn't speak again. She just watched me with that patient, unblinking stare. I left without saying a word for the next 2 days. I tried to focus on the smallest tasks, archiving old data logs, confirming inventory receipts, anything that didn't involve thinking about what I'd seen. But the feeling of pressure never left me, as if the walls themselves were leaning closer. Every time I passed a security camera, I felt sure someone on the other end was tracking my every step. That's when the messages started. The first arrived in my secure inbox, tagged with a hash I didn't recognize. The subject line was empty. The body contained a single sentence: "You need to see what I've saved." No signature. I almost ignored it, but my curiosity had outgrown my sense of caution. I followed the embedded link, which opened a plain text page, headed with 3 words, deeppolar.net, archiveside, heard of the site before. It was infamous in Fringe Circles, dumping ground for leaked files, half-baked theories, and anonymous testimonies. The moderators were ruthless about pruning obvious nonsense, but even so, most professionals dismissed it as conspiracist noise. Until now, I'd done the same. But this time was different, because the first file listed on the page was titled Aurora _uncensored _preview.zip.i. Didn't dare download it over the network. Instead, I copied the link to a burner laptop and waited until my shift ended in my quarters. I turned off the overhead light and watched the progress bar inch across the screen. My breath came shallow. Every few seconds, I checked the door, half expecting a knock when the download finished. I unpacked the archive. Inside was a jumble of files, photos, audio clips, long strings of code. Most had names I didn't recognize, but one folder was marked snowman.i. Opened it at first. I thought it was just more speculation, anonymous posts, threads copied from old forums. Then I started reading. Each entry was dated and time-stamped. Going back to 2018, one of the earliest was simple. March 21st, 2018, 3:47. UTC subglacial cores show diffraction at 1.21 GHz, recorded in containment logs. No public disclosure. I scrolled further, skimming dozens of notes about drill malfunctions and unexplained vibrations. Then I saw an entry from 2019 that made my throat go dry. GRLD 1799, not inert. Structural response confirmed. Hazmat breach probable. It was dated 6 months before the first seismic anomaly I'd personally logged. The next few entries were more alarming. Snowman wrote about personnel disappearing, about convoys rerouted without explanation, about memory disruptive emissions during phase beta tests. I sat back, rubbing my temples. If these logs were real, someone had been trying to sound the alarm for years, and no one listened. I wanted to dismiss it, call it paranoia, but the details were too specific, too close to the fragments I'd seen in official documents. It felt like standing in a dark room and realizing I'd been surrounded the whole time. I kept reading. In an entry dated just 3 weeks prior, Snowman described a file dump called Aurora _uncensored.zip. He claimed it contained the full technical documentation of the FR1799 samples, including schematics of something called a phase beta biological interface. I'd never heard that phrase in any official communication. but even seeing the words made my skin crawl. I closed the file and sat in the dark, listening to the low drone of the compound generators. Part of me still hoped this was all an elaborate hoax. Some bored hacker piecing together fragments to look credible, but deep down, I felt the truth pressing against my ribs. I needed to know who Snowman was. I didn't have to wait long. The next morning, a message appeared on my burner phone. I can prove it's real, but not over the network. No name, but I knew who it was. Meet me behind the secondary storage hangar at 0200. I read it twice, then deleted it all day. I rehearsed excuses in my head, reasons to stay in my bunk, reasons to forget any of this had happened. But when the hour came, I was already lacing my boots. The night was black and silent. Even the security lights seemed to have dimmed. I moved quickly across the drifted snow, scanning the windows for movement. My breath fogged in the cold air at the back of the hangar. A figure waited in the shadows, hood up, hands in their pockets. I stopped a few paces away. "You're Snowman," I said. He didn't deny it. "You've read the logs," he said quietly. His voice was younger than I expected. "I've read them," I said. "I need to know if they're real." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he pulled a small tablet from his coat. Its screen glowed blue as he turned it toward me. "I copied this before they purged my access," he said. I leaned closer. The tablet displayed a schematic lines of labeled parts, cross-sections of something that looked disturbingly biological. In the corner, a label read, FR1799, Phase Beta Neural Interface Assembly, Rev. 3A. Wave of nausea rose in my throat. "This is what they're building?" I asked. He nodded once. "It's not just an artifact. It's a template. They're trying to recreate it." I looked up, my voice brittle. "Why me? Why send me the files?" "Because you're the only one still asking questions," he said. "The rest of them, they've decided ignorance is safer." A gust of wind rattled the hangar siding. "You need to get out," he continued, "before they lock this place down completely." I shook my head. "I can't leave, not without proof." He studied me for a moment, as if weighing my resolve. Then, he held out the tablet. "Take it," he said. "It's everything I have." My hand hovered in the cold air. "If I take this," I whispered, "there's no way back." His eyes didn't waver. There never was. I closed my fingers around the tablet. We didn't speak again. He slipped away into the dark, leaving me alone behind the hangar. I stood there, clutching the device, feeling the weight of it in my palm. When I finally returned to my quarters, dawn was a thin grey line on the horizon. I locked the door and powered up the tablet. Each file I opened pulled me deeper containment breach reports, phase test protocols, internal emails detailing the pressure to keep it all buried, but one document stopped me cold. A memo dated 6 months ago. Subject, Project Archangel, Specimen. Integration trials, phase beta procedures are provisional. Should neural integration succeed, proceed to phase gamma. Oversight, Dr. M. Heilman, LT, Chimder, R. Rao. Even the shadows felt heavier as I read the names. I shut the tablet and leaned back, my heart slamming in my chest. I knew then the next step wasn't about gathering more evidence. It was about deciding what to do with it. I spent the day pretending to work, while my mind replayed every word Snowman had said behind the hangar. I couldn't focus on the routine tasks the supervisors assigned me: temperature logs, drill calibration sheets, petty bureaucracy that felt hollow in the face of what I'd seen. I kept the tablet hidden under a folded sweater in my locker, checking it every few hours as if I expected it to vanish. No matter how many times I tried to rationalize it, the files were too detailed to be fabricated. By evening, I'd decided to risk the uplink. I had to get the documents out, even if it meant exposure. I waited until the last of the technicians filed out of the communications hub. The wind screamed against the building's steel walls, masking the sound of my boots on the grated floor. I plugged the tablet into the relay terminal, my fingers clumsy with adrenaline. The screen flared to life. One folder blinked at me, Aurora _uncensored.zip. I hesitated. I knew uploading it would cross every line I had left, but part of me had already decided. I keyed in the secure credentials Snowman had given me and hit transmit. The progress bar moved slowly. With each percent, my heartbeat grew louder. At 73%, a soft click sounded behind me. I turned, my mouth dry. A security officer stood in the doorway. He didn't speak, didn't move, just watched the screen. The bar inched to 82%. I forced myself to speak. System maintenance, I lied. Voice rough. He raised one eyebrow, but still didn't react. 8%. I could feel sweat sliding down my back. Finally, the screen flashed transfer complete. The officer stepped aside without a word. I brushed past him, trying not to break into a run. I didn't stop moving until I was back in my quarters. The door bolted behind me. Only then did I allow myself to breathe. The files were gone, out in the world, but I knew that meant someone would be coming for me. I waited for hours, but no alarm sounded. No security team banged on my door. Instead, a message arrived on my laptop just after dawn. You did the right thing. No signature. I closed the screen and pressed my palms against my eyes. Part of me wanted to believe it. Another part knew it was only the beginning. By the compound was buzzing in a way I hadn't seen before. People moved in tight groups, whispering. Every few minutes, someone glanced at their phone as if expecting new orders. That's when the news reached me. The leak had gone live. A contact in Brussels sent me a single line, :mega.nz mirror is active. It's everywhere. I checked the link there. It was Aurora _uncensored.zipl, ready mirrored across dozens of nodes. I clicked through the contents, my pulse rising. Hundreds of images and documents, each more damning than the last. Satellite photos of the excavation pit, the exposed metallic lattice gleaming under floodlights. Personnel rosters with names I recognize, downed some I didn't. And then the slides, a presentation titled Adaptive Metamaterials from FR 1799. I scrolled past the cover page, feeling as if my body had gone hollow. Inside were schematic drawings of electrode arrays coated in a dull grey alloy. Each diagram was labeled in clinical language: neural conduction phase, beta, sub-millisecond, propagation latency. I stopped on an annotated cross-dash section. It showed a thin implant, pressed against the curve of a human skull. Fine tracer lines described signal paths winding into the brainstem. The caption read, Preliminary Integration Test, Subject A1, Cognitive Integrity Status, Undetermined. I swallowed hard, tasting bile. They hadn't just tested compatibility, they'd implanted someone. I clicked further, unable to look away in the metadata field. A location stamp flashed across the screen. Cryotech Facility 0425, Thule Sector. A second file contained a blurry still image. A figure in a medical gown lay on a gurney, head swathed in bandages. No name, no details. Just the note. Biological interface. Ongoing assessment. My hands trembled. For months, I'd suspected something like this, but seeing it confirmed felt like stepping off a cliff. The next document was a logistics report detailing specimen transfers. It showed shipment dates, transport vehicle IDs, and a manifest labeled sample, designate a 1, active state, precautions. Required the same code Snowman had warned me about. I closed the laptop, breathing in ragged pulls. I knew then I had to leave. If I stayed, I'd either vanish or be forced to sign a non-disclosure so binding I might as well have been erased. I packed my bag in slow, deliberate motions. My mind worked through the steps. Get to the airstrip, find passage on a supply flight, disappear. But before I moved, my laptop chimed again. Another message. They know you sent it. You have hours, not days. No signature. I left the room without looking back. The halls were quiet in that unnatural way that always came before something broke open at the exit. A young technician glanced up as I passed. His eyes flickered with something fear, maybe pity, but he didn't say a word. Outside, the wind howled over the dark ice. I pulled my hood tight, my breath crystallizing in the air. I reached the comms hub again, heart hammering, and slipped inside. I had to know. If anyone had seen the files, if they believed them, the uplink was still active. I opened a secure chat channel and sent a single message to Gian. It's real, everything. Check the leak for a moment. I thought he wouldn't respond. Then a reply appeared. I've seen it. I don't know what to say. Believe me, I typed. There. Building something that doesn't belong in this world. Another pause. Be careful, Anna. If you disappear, no one will know where to look. I closed the channel before I could second-guess myself. The door behind me creaked. I turned, expecting a guard. Instead, Rose stood in the threshold, her face unreadable. You should have come to me, she said. Softly I forced myself to meet her eyes. You would have stopped me. She didn't deny it. You've signed your death warrant, she said. Maybe, I said, but at least someone will know. We stood there for a long moment. Finally, she stepped aside. I can't protect you anymore, she said. Whatever happens next, you're on your own. I walked past her into the cold, feeling the wind whip against my face. Somewhere out in the world, the files were spreading. I hoped it would be enough. As I reached the edge of the compound, I looked back. One last time, the floodlights gleamed against the ice. Somewhere beneath it, the thing we'd uncovered waited in the dark. I knew it wouldn't stay hidden forever, and neither would I. I didn't sleep the night after I left the compound. I found a weather shelter 3 kilometers east, its door half buried. In drifting snow, it was only a steel box with a broken heater, but for a few hours it was enough. I lay there with my back against the wall, replaying every moment of the leak. The look in Rao's eyes when she said she couldn't protect me, the way the comms officer had turned away when I walked out. Part of me kept expecting headlights to appear through the storm, a silent convoy sent to collect me, but no one came dawn. The morning I walked north, keeping the rising sun behind my left shoulder. My plan was simple: reach the Inuit settlement near Connaught. There, I could find a satellite phone, maybe charter a flight, But the closer I got to the ice road that cut across the northern perimeter, the more I felt like I was moving deeper into something I didn't understand. That's where I met Skren. Mikkelsen. It was almost sunset when I spotted the figure in the distance. He was kneeling beside a snowmobile, his gloved hands working at something near the engine. For a moment, I considered circling around him. No one out here was just passing by, but curiosity overrode caution. He didn't look up when I approached. His parka was old but carefully patched. The fur hood turned up against the wind. "You're a long way from the station," he said without lifting his head. His English was rough, but clear. I didn't answer right away. He finished adjusting the cables, then sat back on his heels. Finally, he looked at me. His face was lined, weathered from years in the cold, but his eyes were sharp. "I know who you are," he said. My stomach clenched. "And who are you?" Skren Mikkelsen. Arctic Witness Project. I'd heard the name once, in an internal memo describing civilian observers. I'd assumed it was just a coversome local liaison group set up to keep an eye on the researchers. But in that moment, watching him calmly appraise me, I realized he'd been watching all of us. "You came here to find something," he said, "or to run from it?" "Maybe both," I said quietly. He nodded once, as if that was enough. Then he motioned for me to sit on the snowmobile's rear cargo crate. "You've seen the lights," he said after a pause. "The ones that move under the ice, yes. And you heard the hum." I nodded. He looked out toward the glacier. "You know, they call it alive now," he said. "That's what the old men in the village say. They've seen it breathe." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. "You believe them?" I asked. Skren didn't answer. Instead, he reached into the pocket of his parka and pulled out a small recorder. He pressed play. A low vibration filled the air. It was almost subsonica droning resonance that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "I made this 2 nights ago," he said. "Here." He gestured to the ground beneath the snowmobile. I swallowed, feeling my heartbeat sink to the strange rhythm. "What did you hear after?" I asked. "Nothing," he said. "The GPS cut out. My radio stopped working." I looked at him carefully. "Why did you come back?" His mouth tightened. "Because people should know, and because I think you're trying to make them see." He dug into another pocket and produced a folded piece of paper. It was damp along the edges, but the ink hadn't bled. He handed it to me without explanation. I unfolded it and saw a set of coordinates in neat block letters. Below, a short sentence: "Resonance origin confirmed to 3,300 meters." I looked up. "This is where you recorded the hum." "No," he said. "This is where it starts." A gust of wind rattled the snowmobile. "You're planning to go back," I said. He met my eyes, and for the first time, I saw something like fear. "I have to," he said. "If I don't, they'll say it was nothing. Just old stories." I felt my mouth go dry. "Then I'm coming with you." He didn't argue. He only nodded once and started the engine. The snowmobile vibrated beneath us as we sped into the darkness. It took almost 2 hours to reach the ridge. The wind came in bursts, flinging snow across our visors until the world shrank to a white blur. Finally, Skren raised one gloved hand and killed the engine. We sat in silence, breathing the cold. Beneath us, the ice stretched smooth and unbroken. Skren swung off the seat and knelt, pressing his palm against the snow. I waited, my heart drumming. He closed his eyes, and then I felt it so faint I thought I imagined it. A vibration, deep underfoot, pulsing in a steady rhythm. The same hum from his recorder, but closer. He looked up at me, eyes wide. "It's stronger," he said. I knelt beside him, pressing my own palm flat as we listened. The pitch shifted higher, almost musical. A line of faint blue light shimmered across the ice, as if something beneath us was stirring. I felt something then I hadn't allowed myself to feel in weeks. Skren stood, brushing snow from his knees. "You hear it now," he said quietly. "You believe me, I never doubted," I whispered. We didn't move for a long time. Finally, Skrin turned back toward the snowmobile. "We need to leave," he said. "If they find us here." He didn't finish the thought. We climbed onto the seat, and he started the engine. Halfway back, I looked. Over my shoulder, the blue light still glowed under the ice, a slow pulse marking the heartbeat of something ancient. When we reached the edge of the compound, Skren didn't follow me to the gate. He stopped the snowmobile and looked up at the sky. "If I disappear," he said, "remember this place." I swallowed hard. "You won't disappear." But even as I said it, I knew I was lying. He held out a small data stick. "Audio files," he said. "GPS logs. Maybe it will help." I closed my fingers around it. He nodded once, then turned and drove into the dark. I watched the red taillight fade to nothing. I stood alone on the ice, feeling the wind against my face. Part of me wanted to run after him, to drag him back and make him promise to stay safe. But I knew there were no such promises left to make. I slipped the data stick into my pocket and turned toward the compound lights. Somewhere inside, they were already searching for me, and for the first time, I didn't care. Because now I had proof, and I was ready to use it by the time I slipped back into the compound. My face was numb from the wind. I didn't bother going to my quarters. Instead, I made straight for the comms room, trying to keep my footsteps quiet. I still had Skrin's data stick clenched in my hand. Every time I looked at it, my pulse sped up. I told myself I'd upload the files and finally force someone to take me seriously. That if I could just get them into the right hands, the rest would follow. But as soon as I stepped into the comms hub, I knew it wouldn't be so simple. A woman I didn't recognize was standing near the central console, her arms folded. Her uniform wasn't standard issue. She wore a white jacket with a small NASA insignia on the shoulder. When she turned to look at me, her expression was perfectly calm. "You're Anna Richter," she said. It wasn't a question. I opened my mouth, but no sound came. She gave a small, polite nod. "I'm Dr. Hiroshi Tanaka, Geoscience Today." That name made my stomach turn. Geoscience Today was the same journal that had run the debunking piece about electromagnetic anomalies. A carefully worded article that explained everything away geothermal vents, shifting permafrost, sensor drift. I'd read it the week before and almost believed it myself. "Why are you here?" I asked. Finally, she tilted her head, studying me. "To report on the rumors, the supposed non-terrestrial alloys, the claims that you and your colleagues have been circulating." Her voice was neutral, but her eyes were cold. "I have data," I said. I held up the stick. My hand was shaking. Dr. Tanaka didn't even glance at it. "I'm sure you do. But you're aware that much of what has been leaked is unverifiable, that several files you've released conflict with existing records." "They're not fabricated," I said, louder than I meant to. She sighed and walked to the console, resting her palm lightly on the edge. "Do you know how many times I've heard that?" From how many frightened researchers? I wanted to shout at her, to drag her out to the ice and make her hear the resonance herself. But instead, I said nothing. She straightened, brushing invisible dust from her sleeve. "I'm not here to call you a liar," she said softly. "But you should consider the possibility that you are being used. That all this noise is meant to distract from something more mundane." She stepped past me, heading for the door. "For what it's worth," she added, pausing with her hand on the frame, "I hope you're wrong." Then she left me alone in the flickering light. I stood there for a long time, my thoughts churning. What if she was right? What if every file, every leak, every whisper was part of some elaborate manipulation? What if Skren was a pawn too? I sank into the nearest chair, my hands pressed to my face. I wanted to believe in the clarity of evidence, but the truth was, I hadn't seen the buried structure with my own eyes. I hadn't touched the alloy. I'd only followed trails laid by other people, and now the world was watching those trails burn. An hour later, my laptop buzzed with a new alert. A panel discussion had just gone live-streamed to 500,000 viewers. On one side of the split screen, a familiar face, Dr. Alina Kovalev, the geophysicist who'd first reported the rhythmic seismic signatures. On the other, a Pentagon spokesperson, a man whose voice I recognized from earlier briefings. The moderator was saying something about balancing evidence with responsible skepticism. Kovalev looked tired, her hair pulled back severely. She tapped a printout on her desk. "These are the original logs," she said, her accent clipped. "We saw repeated signals that cannot be explained by geothermal events." The spokesperson didn't even look up. "Your sensors were outdated. This entire narrative is a product of confirmation bias," he said smoothly. Kovalev's mouth tightened, and then he added, "or deliberate fabrication by bad actors." I felt something in me snap. I knew I had to show them the files, even if no one believed me, even if it ended my career. I connected Skren's data stick to my laptop, my hands moving automatically. The folder tree opened. Audio files, GPS logs, a single video file. I clicked the video first. A shaky camera feed appeared, a time-stamped recording from Skren's chest rig. He was standing on the ice. A pale glow shimmered under his boots. The hum vibrated through my speakers, so clear it made my teeth ache. In the frame, Skren raised a small metal instrument, pressing it to the snow. The reading on its display was unmistakable. 1.21 G's resonance. I scrubbed back and replayed it twice, just to be sure it was exactly what Snowman had described years earlier. I copied the video and queued it for upload to every contact I still trusted. But before I hit send, a thought stopped me. What if Dr. Tanaka was right? What if this was bait-planted evidence meant to make me look unstable? I felt my breath catch in my throat. I didn't know what to believe anymore. I closed my eyes, listening to the hum still echoing in my speakers. If it was a hoax, it was the most elaborate I'd ever seen, but the only way to prove it was to show it. I forced myself to resume the upload. Halfway through, the progress bar froze. Then a message flashed across the screen. "Connection terminated. Network override detector die," swore under my breath. Checking the router, a red LED blinked steadily. Manual shutdown. Someone was cutting me off in real time. I pulled the stick free and stuffed it into my pocket. My heart was hammering so loudly I could barely think. I ran for the exit, slipping into the night without even grabbing my coat. The cold bit into my skin as I ducked behind the storage hangars. I needed a place to hide, to regroup. The only person left who might help me was Ro. I checked the windows of the security annex. Most were dark, but in the corner office, a faint light glowed. I crossed the snow, every step too loud in the frozen silence. At the door, I knocked once, then twice. A long moment passed. Then the door opened, and Rose stood there, her face unreadable, there. "Shutting everything down," I said, my voice hoarse. "I know," she replied. I held out Skrin's stick. "This is the only proof left." Ro took it without comment, sliding it into her jacket. "You need to disappear," she said. "And you." She looked past me at the darkness beyond the compound. "I'll stay as long as I can." Her voice was softer than I'd ever heard it. "But when they come for me," she added, "don't waste time trying to find me." I nodded, my throat tight in that moment. I didn't know if I trusted her, but I knew she was the only person who still cared whether the truth survived. I stepped back into the wind, my mind already working through the next moves. I would go to Connacht. I would find a way to get the files out, even if it meant never coming back. As I slipped into the shadows, I thought of the glow beneath the ice, the hum that refused to be silenced, and I knew I hadn't reached the end of the story. I had only crossed another threshold. I didn't sleep after leaving Rao's office. I spent the last hours before dawn sitting behind the supply hangars, my back pressed against the cold wall. I tried to keep my mind blank, but the same questions circled over and over. What was I trying to do? Prove something to the world, to myself. I thought of Skren's face in the glow of the ice, of Rao's eyes when she said not to come looking. If she disappeared, and I thought of everyone I'd worked beside, all the analysts and technicians who never asked questions because it was easier to believe the official narrative. Maybe they were smarter than me. When the first light began to crawl across the horizon, I stood and walked to the eastern fence. From there, I could see the compound spread out in neat rows of lights and steel. A machine pretending to be a research station. Somewhere inside, someone was already erasing logs, rewriting manifests, tightening the last loops of control. I didn't have much time left, so I went to the only place I hadn't dared enter before, the dormitory block for senior project staff. It was almost empty at this hour. The halls were silent except for the low rumble of heating pipes. I found the door I was looking for. The placard read only Dr. S. We'd never spoken directly, but I'd seen the initials on internal memos. Dr. S was one of the mid-level scientists, tasked with reviewing the phase beta results. I'd read his reports, precise, clinical, always stopping short of judgment. But I'd also seen the margins of his drafts, scribbled doubts he never sent. I knocked once. A long pause, then the door opened just far enough for one wary eye to look out. His voice was rough from sleep. "What do you want?" "To talk," I said. "That's all." Another pause. Finally, the door swung open. Inside, the room was dim. Papers covered every surface, some stacked in careful piles, others scattered. Like debris, Dr. S looked smaller than I'd expected. His shoulders were narrow, his hair unkempt, but his gaze was clear. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly. I stepped inside anyway. "You know what they're doing," I said. He didn't answer. He only walked to the desk and picked up a sheaf of handwritten notes. His hand hovered over them, as if he might hide them. "They're going to erase all of it," I pressed. "The logs, the evidence, the records of what's under the ice." I know, he said. I felt a flicker of anger. Then why stay silent? He looked up slowly. Because I thought it was safer, he said. His voice cracked on the last word. Waited, giving him time. Finally, he set the papers down and rubbed his eyes. When I first came here, he said, I believed the story. That we were studying a meteorite. That it could help us build materials no one else could. I thought it was worth the secrecy. He gestured at the nearest stack of files. Then I started seeing the references to phase gamma, to neural integration. Trials, the plans to move beyond research into other uses. His hands trembled. I told myself if I stayed, I could limit the damage. That if someone tried to take it too far, I'd be here to stop them. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. All I did was watch. I sat on the edge of a chair. The plastic felt brittle in the cold. It's not too late, I said softly. His eyes flicked to mine. It feels too late, he whispered. I reached into my pocket and set Skren's datastick on the table. This is everything I have, I said. Audio logs, resonance readings, the video from the ridge. You can help me get it out. He didn't touch it. You know they'll call it a fabrication, he said. They'll say it's just another hoax to distract from climate change. Maybe, I said. But if we don't try, it's over. He pressed his palms to his eyes. For a moment, I thought he'd refuse. Then, with a slow breath, he lowered his hands. I have something, he said. He reached under the desk and pulled out a battered folder. The paper was yellowed at the edges, like it had been carried around too long. He set it in front of me and flipped it open. Inside was a memo, printed on thick stock and stamped with a black seal. Project Archangel contingency draft, my stomach. Twisted, I read the lines slowly, afraid of what they'd say. If phase beta fails to produce a viable neural interface, contingency protocols authorize deployment of cognitive disruption methods on site personnel. Under no circumstances shall the existence of FR1799 derived metamaterials be acknowledged. Publicly.I looked up. They're prepared to use it, I whispered. Dr. S nodded, double quotes, and if they do, he said, it won't just be this station, they'll deploy it anywhere they think it's necessary. I felt something cold bloom in my chest. How long have you known? I asked. Since before phase beta began. I didn't ask why he'd stayed. Maybe the answer didn't matter anymore. I turned the pages, scanning for more details. One line stood out. Sample designate A1 shows cognitive resonance when exposed to targeted RF fields. I met his gaze. This is why they've been moving it, I said. Yes, he replied. They're afraid of what it can do, unafraid of what it might prove. He rested one hand on the folder. I can give you my clearance codes, he said. It's the only leverage I have left. I nodded. He closed the folder, pressing it into my hands. If you go, he said, don't come back. I stood, unsure what to say. Thank you, I managed. He didn't answer. He just sat there, staring at the floor, as if he'd already disappeared. I slipped into the hall, feeling the weight of the folder against my ribs. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to resolve. I wasn't just trying to survive. Anymore, I was trying to finish what we'd started. As I moved through the empty corridor, a soft chime echoed from the nearest console. An automated alert scrolled across the screen. Outbound convoys scheduled. 400 departure. I knew what it meant they were moving the sample, probably to Thule. I pressed my hand to the folder, feeling my heart pound. I had hours to decide, run or follow them. As I stood there, a new message flashed onto the console. From Snowmanith. You want to see the truth. This is your last chance. I didn't hesitate. I typed a single reply. Where do I meet you? The answer came at once. Loading bay. 3:30. I closed the console and walked into the dark. Every step heavy with the knowledge that nothing would ever be the same. I checked my watch as I left Dr. S's room. The hour was later than I thought. 2:45. The convoy would be rolling out. In less than 90 minutes, every instinct told me to run to take the folder, the data stick, and vanish into the cold before someone found me. But I couldn't shake the memory of that last message from Snowman. This is your last chance. Somewhere in the loading bay, answers waited that I'd spent months risking everything to find. I walked fast, keeping close to the shadows. The compound felt half asleep. A few guards moved along the fence line, their radios murmuring low. No one stopped me. As I neared the cargo hangar, I spotted the convoy through the gap in the outer doors. 4 heavy transport trucks idled in a row, exhaust billowing white into the darkness. A 5th vehicular, narrow van with reinforced panels sat apart from the others. I knew without asking that was where they'd stowed the sample. I circled, wide around the trucks, past the stacks of sealed crates and fuel drums. My boots made a soft crunching in the frost dot at the far end of the bay. A figure stepped into view. Snowman. He wore the same grey parka I'd seen that night behind the hangar. His hood was pulled low, but I recognized his voice when he spoke. You made it, I nodded, my throat too tight to answer. He motioned me closer. They'll be gone soon, he said. If you're serious about exposing this is the only time to get inside. I glanced at the van. The rear doors were chained shut. A red hazard placard was bolted to the side. The words biocontainment printed in tall block letters. You want to get in there? I said quietly. Snowman's eyes didn't waver. I want to record it. I want the world to see exactly what they've buried. I hesitated. The folder in my coat felt heavy against my ribs. If we're caught, I began. I know, he said. A moment passed. Then he turned, leading me behind a stack of cargo crates. He crouched and pulled a thin fiber optic cable from his pocket. I tapped the convoy manifest last night, he said. There are only 2 guards assigned to the van. One will be inside the cab. The other does the perimeter walk every 10 minutes. He looked at me, his face half in shadow. If we move fast, we'll have 6 minutes. I didn't trust my voice, so I just nodded. Snowman clipped the fiber optic line to a port on the loading dock control box. A small light pulsed green. Give it a moment, he said. I felt my heart beat in my throat as the seconds dragged by. Then, with a soft click, the chain on the van's rear doors released. Snowman looked at me, ready. I wasn't, but I opened the door anyway. The air inside the van was cold and chemical, tinged with something metallic. A single flood lamp glared down over a metal crate bolted to the floor. Its surface was covered in warning labels and cryptic symbols. I stepped inside. My breath hung in the air. Snowman followed, pulling the doors nearly shut behind us. He slipped a small camera from his pocket and started recording. I crouched beside the crate, reading the stenciled letters. Sample designate a 1 active containment. My mouth was dry. Snowman whispered, help me open it. I hesitated, but I moved to the side, bracing my hand against the latch. Together, we lifted the lid. Inside lay a black composite shell, smooth as glass. It was shaped like a human torso. Along its surface, fine silver filaments pulsed with a dull glow. I reached out. My fingers stopped just short of touching it. The hum started, then low, at first more vibration than sound, but as we watched it, rose in pitch, resolving into a deep, resonant tone that seemed to move through the floor, into my bones. Snowman's camera trembled in his hands. He whispered, "It's awake." I swallowed. "What is it?" He didn't answer. Instead, he raised the camera higher, capturing every detail. The glow brightened, tracing faint geometric patterns across the shell's surface. For a moment, I felt certain it was aware of us. Not alive, exactly, but watching. I stepped back, my heart hammering. "We need to close it," I said. Snowman didn't move. "Look at it," he murmured. "It's not human, and they're trying to make it part of us." I grabbed his arm, hard. "If we stay, we'll never leave," I hissed. He blinked, as if coming out of a trance. Slowly, he lowered the camera. Together, we shut the crate. The hum faded, but the vibration lingered in. My chest, Snowman locked the latch. His hands were shaking. Outside, footsteps crunched on the ice. My blood turned to ice. I pressed a finger to my lips, motioning him toward the corner. The door opened. A guard leaned in, his flashlight beam cutting across the floor. I held my breath, willing my body to be invisible. The light swept over the crate, over the walls, then back out the door. The footsteps retreated. Snowman exhaled, his breath ragged. "We have to go," I whispered. He nodded. We slipped out the back, easing the door shut. In the darkness between the trucks, he turned to me. "Take this," he said, pressing the camera into my hand. I tried to push it back, but he shook his head. "If I don't make it out, you have to finish it." "Don't say that," I whispered. His eyes were calm. "Promise me." My throat closed, but I nodded. He stepped back, vanishing into the shadows without another word. I tucked the camera under my coat and moved in the opposite direction. The last I saw of him was a flicker of movement as he disappeared behind the storage units. I made it to the perimeter fence just as the convoy began to rumble forward, headlights slicing the dark. I slipped through a breach in the wire and crouched low in the snow. The trucks passed one by one, their engines loud in the frozen stillness, and then the van rolled past. For a split second, I thought I saw movement behind the tinted glass, a flicker of pale blue. I closed my eyes, fighting the urge to run after it. When I finally stood, the convoy was gone, its tail lights a fading constellation. I pressed my hand to the camera under my coat. Whatever came next, this was the last line, the last chance to prove what I'd seen. The hum still echoed in my bones, and as I turned toward the north, I knew I wasn't walking away. I was walking deeper into the abyss. I walked north until my legs went numb. I kept the camera pressed to my ribs under my coat, afraid the cold would drain its battery. Every step felt heavier than the last, but I couldn't stop moving. When I finally reached the edge of the ridge, I turned back to look at the compound. The lights were shrinking behind me, a tight grid in the darkness, still pretending to be an ordinary research station. I wanted to believe that crossing this last distance would give me perspective, that putting space between me and that place would quiet the noise in my head. It didn't. The hum was still there, even though I'd left the van hours ago. A vibration in my bones that felt less like memory and more like something I'd carried away with me. I stopped behind a drifted ridge and crouched, pulling the camera free. The display flickered to life, showing the last recorded frames, the black composite shell, the dull lines of light crawling across its surface. I tried to watch it all the way through, but I couldn't. I snapped the screen shut and pressed my hands over my face. Somewhere in that convoy, something was moving toward a destination none of us understood. I thought of Snowman slipping away behind the storage units, of the look in his eyes when he pressed the camera into my hands. A promise without words. If I don't come back, you will. I didn't know if he'd made it out. I told myself I had to keep going, but the thought of moving made my chest tighten. I pulled my satellite phone from my pack, my fingers stiff. I dialed the only number I trusted. Gian picked up after the first ring. His voice was soft, but ragged at the edges. "Anna," I swallowed. "It's me. Where are you?" he asked. "North of the station. I have proof. Video from inside the convoy." There was a pause. "They've already issued a statement," he said. "They're calling it a containment drill. They've denied everything." I closed my eyes. They always deny everything. "I know," he said quietly, "but this time there are more eyes on them." A gust of wind rattled the ridge. I hunched lower, shielding the phone from the cold. "I don't know what to do next," I admitted. "I don't even know if anyone will believe me." Another long pause. "You still have the files?" he asked. Yes. "Then you keep moving," he said. "You get them out, even if you have to hand them to a dozen different people." I wanted to believe that would be enough, that exposure alone could change the outcome. But deep down, I knew the machine was too big to stop. "They're going to say I'm unstable," I whispered. "Let them," Jane said. "You've come too far to let that matter." His voice was calm, almost steady. "Anna," he added, softer, "don't let them bury you with this." The line went silent. I held the phone for a long time before I shut it off. I stayed hidden behind the ridge until dawn edged over the ice. When I finally stood, I felt older, as if every lie I'd uncovered had left a mark. I started walking again, toward Connacht, toward whatever came next. By midday, I reached a supply. Outposts little more than a metal shed and a shortwave relay antenna. The door was bolted, but the latch was old. I forced it open and stepped inside. It was warmer, enough to let the numbness fade from my fingers. I set the camera on a wooden crate and stared at it. Part of me wanted to smash it, to end the questions before they multiplied. But I knew that would be surrender instead. I connected it to the relay console and began to queue the files for upload as the progress bar crawled forward. I opened the last video again. The crate, the black shell, the rising hum, but something in the corner of the frame caught my attention, a glint I hadn't noticed before. I paused the playback and magnified the image. On the edge of the containment shell, a small engraving, numbers and letters, X24. Archangel. I felt my breath catch. It wasn't just another code name. Archangel was the contingency Dr. S had shown. Metha planned to expand beyond research, to make something that could never be called a scientific discovery again. My hand tightened on the edge of the console. If the convoy reached Thule, this program would go dark for good. I knew then that uploading the files wouldn't be enough. Someone had to witness the end. I copied the coordinates from the convoy manifest, checking them against the map pinned to the wall. It was a day's journey north, maybe less if I kept moving. I looked at the blinking cursor on the screen. The upload was only at 57%. I forced myself to wait. When the final file completed, I sent a single message to Jayan. If I don't come back, tell them the ice was never empty. I powered down the relay and tucked the camera into my coat. Outside, the wind had picked up again. I adjusted my pack and stepped into it, feeling the cold bite through every layer. I knew this was the last threshold, not just a line between evidence and secrecy, but between who I'd been and whoever I was about to become. As I walked, I tried to imagine what I would find. The convoy parked in an unmarked hangar. The shell lifted out under floodlights, the hum rising until it erased every trace of who we were, or worse, nothing at all. An empty site, everything packed away. A silence so complete it made me doubt I'd ever seen the light in the ice. Each step felt heavier than the one before, but I kept moving, because stopping meant letting them decide what the world believed. As dusk fell, I saw headlights in the distance to pale beams cutting through the snow. I dropped to one knee, watching from behind a ridge of wind-carved ice. A transport truck idled near a small, prefabricated shelter. The rear doors were open, figures moved inside, lifting crates. For a moment, I thought I saw the shell itself, black and gleaming in the artificial light. My breath caught. Then the door swung shut. I crawled closer, each motion slow, deliberate. I was close enough now to see a label on the container. Sample designate A1, cognitive interface, active state. I knew. It was real, and I knew I couldn't walk away. I pulled the camera free and began recording. I didn't know if I'd survive the night, but at least someone would have proof that this happened, that the hum beneath the ice wasn't a story, that the spiral we'd all been circling was real, and still pulling us down. As I pressed my eye to the viewfinder, I felt something cold and bright settle inside me, a conviction I hadn't felt since the first anomaly flickered across my screen. Whatever this was, it deserved to be seen, even if no one believed it, even if it cost everything. Thanks for watching. Make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to get more.